The November wind cut through the parking lot of Ruby's Diner like a knife, carrying with it the smell of rain and dying leaves. The neon sign above the entrance flickered intermittently, the R in Ruby's having given up the fight years ago, leaving the establishment to advertise itself as Ruby's Diner to anyone driving down Route 40. It was the kind of place that time had forgotten, a relic from the 1960s that had somehow survived the onslaught of chain restaurants and fast food franchises that dominated the highway. Emily Carter pushed through the glass door at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early for her 6 o'clock shift. At 26 years old, she had the kind of face that still held traces of youth but carried the weight of someone who'd grown up too fast. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the bags under her hazel eyes told the story of another sleepless night spent calculating bills and wondering how she'd make ends meet this month. "Morning, Em," called out Pete, the night shift cook, as he wiped down the grill. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee filled the air, a scent so familiar to Emily that she barely noticed it anymore. "Morning, Pete. Busy night?" Emily asked, tying her apron around her waist and grabbing her order pad from the worn cubby that had held her things for the past 3 years. "Dead as always. Had maybe 6 customers total. Weekend crowd should pick up, though." Pete scraped the grill with practiced efficiency, the metal spatula making a rhythmic scraping sound against the hot surface. Emily nodded, moving behind the counter to start her opening routine. Check the coffee machines, fill the sugar dispensers, make sure the salt and pepper shakers were full, wipe down the menus that had become sticky despite daily cleaning. It was mindless work, the kind that allowed her thoughts to wander to places she'd rather they didn't go. The letter from the hospital billing department sat in her purse, tucked inside her wallet where she wouldn't have to look at it constantly. $8,147.89. That's what they said she still owed for her father's emergency surgery 6 months ago. Never mind that he'd died anyway, 3 weeks after the operation, his liver finally giving up after years of quiet alcoholism that he'd hidden from everyone, including himself. The debt remained, a ghost that haunted her more persistently than any memory of her father ever could. "You okay, honey?" Pete's voice broke through her thoughts. He was looking at her with concern, the way he often did lately. Pete was 63, had worked at Ruby's for almost 20 years, and had appointed himself as Emily's unofficial guardian since her father passed. "Yeah, just tired. Didn't sleep well." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The morning shift passed in its usual rhythm. The regulars came in. Old Mr. Henderson, who always ordered scrambled eggs and wheat toast. Sarah Collins, who worked at the DMV and needed her coffee fix before facing another day of frustrated drivers. Tommy Martinez, who drove trucks and stopped by every Saturday on his route south. Emily knew their orders by heart, knew their stories, knew the comfortable small talk that made them feel seen in a world that largely ignored people like them. By 11:30 a.m., the diner had settled into the pre-lunch lull. Emily was refilling ketchup bottles when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and something in her gut tightened. 3 men entered, and they were wrong for this place. Not wrong in an obvious way. They weren't wearing suits or flashing guns like in the movies. But there was something about them that didn't fit the worn booths and faded linoleum of Ruby's Diner. The man in front was in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair combed back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a simple black wool coat over a dark gray sweater, expensive but understated. His shoes were polished leather, the kind that probably cost more than Emily made in a month. The 2 men behind him were younger, maybe in their 30s. One was tall and broad-shouldered with close-cropped dark hair, the other leaner with a carefully trimmed beard. They moved like soldiers, their eyes scanning the diner with a professional wariness that made Emily's skin prickle. "Good morning, gentlemen. Sit anywhere you'd like," Emily said, forcing her customer service smile into place. The older man's eyes met hers, and she felt pinned by the intelligence in them. They were dark brown, almost black, and they seemed to look right through her practiced cheerfulness to something deeper. After a moment that lasted too long, he smiled, a surprisingly warm expression that softened his harsh features. "Thank you, miss." His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. New York, maybe, or New Jersey. They chose the corner booth, the one that gave a clear view of the entire diner and both exits. The older man slid in facing the door, while the other 2 took positions on either side of him. Emily gave them a minute to settle before approaching with menus and water glasses. "What can I get you gentlemen to drink?" she asked, setting the waters down carefully. "Coffee black," said the older man. "And I think we'll all have breakfast. I'll take the vegetable omelet, wheat toast, no butter." "Same," said the bearded man. "Pancakes, bacon, and eggs over easy," said the broad-shouldered one, and Emily caught a brief smile from the older man, as if this was an old argument between them. Coming right up, Emily collected the menus and headed back to the kitchen, putting the order slip up for Pete. "Those guys cops?" Pete asked, glancing through the window at the booth. "I don't think so," Emily said quietly. "But there's something." She poured 3 coffees and brought them over. As she set them down, she noticed the older man watching her again, but not in the way men usually did. He wasn't looking at her body or trying to catch her eye flirtatiously. He was studying her the way someone might study a painting in a museum, with genuine curiosity and interest. "You've worked here long?" he asked conversationally. "About 3 years," Emily replied, keeping her tone professional but friendly. "You like it?" The question surprised her. Most customers didn't ask things like that, didn't see waitresses as real people with opinions about their work. "It's honest work. The people are good," she said carefully. It was true enough, even if it wasn't the whole story. She liked Pete and most of the regulars, but the pay was terrible. The hours were long, and her feet ached every night. The man nodded as if she'd said something profound. Honest work is undervalued these days. Before Emily could respond, the bell chimed again, and a small rush of lunch customers came in. She excused herself and dove into the familiar choreography of taking orders, delivering food, refilling drinks, and making small talk. The 3 men ate quietly, speaking to each other in low tones she couldn't hear over the diner's ambient noise. She brought their check after they'd finished, setting it discreetly next to the older man's elbow. He glanced at it, $47.83, and pulled out a money clip thick with bills. He peeled off 3 20s and handed them to her. "Keep the change." Emily's eyes widened. That was more than a 25% tip, generous by any standard, especially at a place like Ruby's. "Thank you, sir. That's very kind. You provided excellent service." He stood, buttoning his coat. "Have a good day, miss." Emily Carter." "Emily." He repeated her name as if committing it to memory. "A pleasure." The 3 men headed toward the door, and Emily moved to clear their table. She was stacking plates when she noticed it. A black leather briefcase tucked under the booth seat, pushed back against the wall where it would be easy to miss. "Sir, excuse me, sir," Emily called out, but the door had already closed behind them. Through the window, she saw them getting into a dark sedan, the broad-shouldered man behind the wheel. Emily grabbed the briefcase, intending to run after them, but by the time she reached the door, the car was already pulling out of the parking lot. She stood there for a moment, briefcase in hand, watching the vehicle disappear down Route 40. "Someone forget that?" Pete asked from behind the counter. "Yeah, those 3 men who just left." Emily returned to the booth, setting the briefcase on the table. It was heavier than she'd expected, solid and expensive looking. The leather was buttery soft, the brass clasps gleaming. "They'll probably realize and come back for it," Pete said reasonably. "Probably," Emily agreed, but something felt off. Men who dressed like that, who carried themselves with that kind of controlled awareness, didn't forget things, especially not briefcases that felt this substantial. The lunch rush intensified, and Emily set the briefcase behind the counter for safekeeping. But throughout the afternoon, as she served sandwiches and refilled coffee cups, her eyes kept drifting to it. Nobody called. Nobody came back. By 3 p.m., the lunch crowd had thinned out, and Maria Gonzalez arrived for the evening shift. Maria was 42, a single mother of 3 who'd been working at Ruby's for almost a decade. She and Emily had formed a friendship based on shared struggles and mutual respect. "Whose is that?" Maria asked, nodding at the briefcase as she tied on her apron. "Some customer left it. 3 guys at lunch, haven't come back for it yet. Fancy looking, probably expensive." "Yeah." Emily chewed her bottom lip, a nervous habit from childhood. "I should probably open it, see if there's any identification inside, so I can call them." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to do that? Maybe just leave it for now, see if they come back." But curiosity was eating at Emily, and practically speaking, if there was a phone number or address inside, she could contact the owner. That would be the responsible thing to do. "I'll just take a quick look," she said, carrying the briefcase to the small back office that Ruby, the diner's original owner who'd retired to Florida 5 years ago, had used for paperwork. Maria followed, glancing over her shoulder as if they were doing something illicit. Emily set the briefcase on the cluttered desk and examined the clasps. They weren't locked. She pressed the brass buttons, and they sprang open with satisfying clicks. The lid lifted. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Money. Stacks and stacks of money, bundled with paper bands, $100 bills, packed tightly in neat rows that filled the briefcase completely. There had to be. Holy Mother of God, Maria whispered, making the sign of the cross. Emily's hands trembled as she touched one of the bundles. It was real. She could tell by the texture, the smell of ink and paper. This wasn't prop money or a prank. This was real cash, more money than she'd ever seen in one place in her entire life. There were probably 50 bundles, maybe more. If each bundle was $10,000, her mind did the math automatically, even as the rational part of her brain screamed that this couldn't be happening. $500,000, maybe more, sitting in a briefcase in the back office of a roadside diner, forgotten by 3 men who'd left a $12 tip on a $48 check. Emily, Maria's voice was urgent, pulling her back from the shock. You need to close that right now. Emily's fingers moved mechanically, lowering the lid and clicking the clasps shut. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. This isn't real, she said, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside her body. This can't be real. It's real enough, Maria said grimly, and you need to think very carefully about what you do next. Emily looked up at her friend, and she saw her own fear reflected in Maria's dark eyes, because they both understood, without saying it explicitly, what this money represented. Normal people didn't carry briefcases full of cash. Normal people didn't forget amounts like this. The older man's face flashed through Emily's mind. Those intelligent, assessing eyes. The way he'd asked if she liked her work. The way he'd watched her, like he was measuring something. They did this on purpose, Emily said slowly. They left it here on purpose. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Emily felt it in her bones, that same intuitive certainty she'd felt when the men first walked in. This was a test. A test? Emily, that's crazy. Nobody tests people with this much money. But even as Maria said it, Emily could see she didn't quite believe her own words. Because what other explanation was there? Men who looked like that, who moved like that, who had this kind of cash. They didn't make mistakes like forgetting briefcases. Emily pulled out her phone, her hand still shaking. I need to call someone, the police maybe. Wait. Maria grabbed her wrist. Just wait a second, think about this. Think about what? Maria, this isn't our money. I know that, but... Maria glanced at the closed office door, lowering her voice even though they were alone. Emily, when was the last time you slept through the night without worrying about money? When was the last time you didn't have to choose between paying your electric bill and buying groceries? Emily pulled her wrist free, stepping back. Don't do this. I'm just saying, you found this money. Nobody knows it's here except us. Those men, whoever they are, they clearly have plenty more where this came from. They won't miss it. But you, Maria's voice softened, becoming almost pleading. Honey, you could pay off your father's hospital bills. You could get out of that terrible apartment. You could actually have a life. Every word hit Emily like a physical blow because they were all true. She could do all those things. The money in that briefcase could solve every problem that kept her up at night, every source of stress and fear that had become so constant. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to not worry. She thought about the hospital billing letter, the overdue rent notice that had been slipped under her door last week, the check engine light in her car that she'd been ignoring for 3 months because she couldn't afford the repair, the way she'd started buying the cheapest food she could find, skipping meals sometimes because it was either that or default on her student loan payments. All of that could disappear. She could breathe again. Emily looked down at the briefcase, and for a long moment the temptation was so strong it felt like gravity, pulling her toward a decision she knew she'd never be able to take back. Then she thought about her father. Not the drunk who'd slowly killed himself with cheap vodka, but the father from before. The one who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd made pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse on Saturday mornings, who'd told her that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when people were watching, but what they did when they were alone. He'd failed that test in the end, hiding his drinking, lying to his daughter, dying in a hospital bed while Emily held his hand and tried to forgive him. But she'd understood even through her grief and anger that he'd taught her something important, that who you chose to be mattered, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. I can't, Emily said quietly. Maria, I can't. Emily, no. She said it more firmly now, picking up the briefcase. This isn't ours. Someone left it here, and I have to give it back. Maria's face hardened. You're making a mistake. You know that, right? You're choosing to stay poor, to keep struggling when you could change everything. Maybe, Emily acknowledged, but I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror. She walked out of the office, carrying the briefcase back to the main counter. The late afternoon light slanted through the diner windows, illuminating dust motes in the air and turning everything golden. A few customers were scattered in booths, absorbed in their phones or newspapers, oblivious to the small drama playing out behind the counter. Emily looked at the briefcase again, trying to find some identification, anything that would tell her how to reach the owners. She opened it once more, moving aside the bundles of cash carefully, searching the briefcase's interior pockets. There, a small leather business card holder tucked into a side compartment. Emily pulled it out and extracted a card. The cardstock was thick, expensive, embossed lettering in a classic font, Vincent Russo Import-Export. Below that, a phone number. No address, no email, no website. Just the name, the deliberately vague business description, and a number. Emily's hands went cold. She'd heard that name before, not often and never in polite conversation. Vincent Russo was the kind of name that came up in whispered discussions, in news reports that carefully used words like alleged and suspected, import-export, the oldest euphemism in the book. Oh God, she breathed. Pete appeared at her shoulder, drawn by something in her voice. What is it? Emily showed him the card, and she watched his weathered face go pale. Those men who were here at lunch, Pete said slowly. One of them was Vincent Russo? I think so. The older one, probably. Emily, you need to call the police, right now, and tell them what? That Vincent Russo left a briefcase here? They'll want to know what's in it, and then... She trailed off, imagining the complications, questions about why she'd opened it, suggestions that maybe she'd been planning to keep it. The briefcase held as evidence, herself potentially tangled up in whatever investigation the police might have into Russo's activities. And if Russo found out she'd called the police, if this really had been a test of some kind, Emily's mind was spinning, trying to calculate outcomes to see the path through this that didn't end with her either arrested or dead in a ditch somewhere. I'll call the number, she said finally. I'll tell them their property is here and they can come get it. That's it. I don't know what's in the briefcase. I'm just a waitress returning something a customer forgot. Emily, it's the only way, Pete. She looked at him, willing him to understand. If I call the police, I'm involved. If I keep it, I'm a thief. But if I just return it like anyone would return a forgotten item, then I'm nothing. I'm nobody. Just someone doing the right thing. Pete studied her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. You're probably right. But be careful. Men like that, they're not like regular people. I know. Emily looked at the clock on the wall. 4:37 p.m. She picked up the diner's cordless phone and dialed the number on the card, her fingers shaking slightly as she pressed each digit. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Emily was starting to think it would go to voicemail when someone picked up. Yes? A man's voice, crisp and professional. Hi, this is Emily Carter. I'm calling from Ruby's Diner on Route 40. A customer left a briefcase here earlier today and I found a card inside with this number. I wanted to let you know so you can come pick it up. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When the man spoke again, his tone had changed subtly, becoming more alert. You found a briefcase? Yes, sir. 3 gentlemen had lunch here around noon, and one of them left it behind. I just want to return it to its owner. I see. Can you describe the briefcase? Black leather, brass clasps. It's got a card inside with the name Vincent Russo. Another pause, longer this time. Emily could hear muffled voices in the background, someone giving instructions. Miss Carter, we'll send someone to collect it. Can you keep it safe until then? Of course, when should I expect someone? Within the hour. And Miss Carter? The man's voice took on a different quality, harder. You haven't opened it, have you? Emily's mouth went dry. The lie formed on her tongue instinctively. The safe answer, the answer that wouldn't raise questions. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion from years of struggling to survive, or maybe it was the memory of her father's lies and where they'd led him. Or maybe it was simply that she was tired of being afraid. Yes, she said clearly. I opened it to look for identification. That's how I found the card. The silence on the other end was absolute. I see, the man said finally. We'll be there soon. The line went dead. Emily set down the phone and realized her hands were trembling. She'd just admitted to a stranger, someone who worked for Vincent Russo, a man whose name was whispered with fear, that she'd opened a briefcase containing what had to be at least $500,000 in cash. "They're coming," she told Pete, who was hovering nearby with an expression of deep concern. "How soon?" "Within the hour." Pete glanced at the clock, then at the briefcase on the counter. "You want me to stay? My shift's over, but I can—" "No," Emily said quickly. "No, you go home. This is my problem, not yours." "Emily, please, Pete, I'll be fine. They just want their property back." Pete didn't look convinced, but after a moment he nodded reluctantly. "You call me if anything feels wrong. Anything at all. I don't care what time it is." "I will. Thank you." After Pete left, Emily carried the briefcase back to the office and locked it in the old filing cabinet that Ruby had left behind. She returned to the front and tried to focus on her remaining customers, but every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Maria kept shooting her worried glances but didn't say anything more. The judgment in her eyes had softened into concern, and when she passed Emily at the coffee station, she squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of support, even if she thought Emily was making a terrible mistake. The minutes crawled by. Emily wiped down tables that were already clean, refilled sugar dispensers that were already full, checked the clock obsessively. 5:43 p.m., 5:51 p.m., 6:07 p.m. At 6:23 p.m., exactly 1 hour and 46 minutes after her phone call, the bell above the door chimed. The same 3 men from lunch walked in. Vincent Russo's dark eyes found Emily immediately, and this time when he looked at her, she saw something different in his expression. Not the casual assessment from before, but a sharp, focused attention that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. He walked directly to the counter. The other 2 men positioned themselves by the door, not blocking it exactly, but present in a way that made it clear they were guarding the entrance. "Miss Carter," Russo said, his cultured voice carrying easily through the nearly empty diner. "I understand you have something that belongs to me." Emily's mouth was dry, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Yes, sir. Let me get it for you." She went to the office, her legs feeling weak, and retrieved the briefcase from the filing cabinet. When she returned, Russo was sitting at the counter, his hands folded in front of him, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Emily set the briefcase in front of him. "I'm sorry for opening it. I was looking for identification so I could contact you." Russo's fingers traced the briefcase's clasps, but he didn't open it. Instead, he studied her face, and the silence stretched out uncomfortably. "You found a substantial amount of money inside," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. And yet you called to return it." "It's not mine." "No," Russo agreed softly. "It's not." He paused, then added, "Most people wouldn't have made that call." Emily didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Russo opened the briefcase, his movements unhurried. He didn't count the money or check its contents. He simply glanced inside, confirmed everything was there, and closed it again. "In my experience, Miss Carter, there are 2 types of people in this world. Those who do the right thing when someone's watching, and those who do the right thing when no one's watching at all. The second type is exceedingly rare." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He set it on the counter between them. "For your honesty." Emily stared at the envelope. "That's not necessary, sir. I was just—" "Open it." With shaking fingers, Emily picked up the envelope and looked inside. More cash, $100 bills, perhaps 50 of them, $5,000. Her mind reeled. That was more than she made in 4 months of work. That was the hospital debt, the overdue rent, the car repair, and the groceries she'd been skipping, all solved in one impossible moment. "I can't accept this," she heard herself say, even as every fiber of her being screamed at her to take it. Russo's eyebrow rose. "Why not?" "Because I didn't do anything special. I just returned something that wasn't mine. Anyone would have done the same." "But they wouldn't have, Miss Carter. That's precisely the point." He pushed the envelope closer to her. "Consider it a finder's fee if that makes it easier, or a reward for exceptional service. But take it." Emily looked at the money, then at Russo's face, trying to read the expression in those dark, intelligent eyes. Was this another test? Was he waiting to see if she'd refuse out of pride, or accept out of greed? Did any answer she gave matter, or had she already passed or failed his test the moment she decided to call? "Thank you," she said finally, taking the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. This is incredibly generous." Something that might have been a smile touched Russo's lips. "Generosity has nothing to do with it. You've earned every dollar through your integrity." He stood, picking up the briefcase. "If you ever need anything, A job, assistance, a problem solved. You call that number on the card. You understand? Yes, sir. Good evening, Miss Carter. Good evening, Mr. Russo. He walked to the door, where his two associates fell into step beside him. Just before leaving, he paused and looked back. That security camera in the corner, he said, nodding at the dusty device mounted above the coffee station. Does it work? Emily followed his gaze. She'd never thought about that camera before. It had been there so long it had become part of the scenery. I don't know, she admitted. I've never seen anyone check the footage. Russo nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft chime. Emily stood behind the counter, envelope in hand, and watched through the window as the three men got into their car and drove away. The November darkness was falling fast, turning the parking lot into a sea of shadows, broken only by the flickering neon sign. Are you okay? Maria appeared at her elbow, her voice anxious. I think so. Emily looked down at the envelope, still not quite believing it was real. I think I'm okay. What's that? A reward for returning the briefcase. Maria's eyes widened. How much? $5,000. Dios mío. Maria crossed herself again. Emily, that man, do you know who he is? I know enough. And you're really going to keep that money? You don't think it's dangerous? Emily thought about the question carefully. She thought about Vincent Russo's eyes, the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he'd solved, the way he'd called her honesty exceedingly rare, and the quiet authority in his voice when he told her to call if she ever needed anything. It was dangerous. Everything about this was dangerous. The money, the man, the door that had been opened by her decision to call instead of keeping the briefcase or calling the police. She'd stepped into a story that wasn't meant for people like her, and there would be consequences. There were always consequences. But she'd also done the right thing, and that had to count for something. Even in a world where men like Vincent Russo operated outside the normal rules, surely integrity still mattered. Surely choosing honesty over self-interest had value. I don't know, Emily said honestly, but I know I did the right thing, and I know I need this money. So yes, I'm keeping it. Maria hugged her suddenly, fierce and quick. Then be careful, mija. Men like that, they remember favors and debts. You did something for him today and he's going to feel like he owes you. But that means you'll owe him too someday. That's how their world works. Emily hugged her back, taking comfort in the warmth and solidity of her friend's embrace. I'll be careful, I promise. After Maria returned to her tables, Emily slipped the envelope into her purse and tried to finish her shift. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her mind kept replaying the afternoon's events, looking for meanings and implications she might have missed. The security camera caught her eye again. Did it work? Had it recorded everything? Her opening the briefcase, the conversation with Maria, Vincent Russo's return? Or was it just a prop, a deterrent that recorded nothing? And if it did work, who would see the footage? Who would know what had happened here today? The questions chased themselves in circles, unanswerable and unsettling. When her shift ended at 9 p.m., Emily walked out to her car under a sky that had clouded over completely, promising rain. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, the envelope heavy in her purse, and looked back at the diner, Ruby's Diner, with its flickering sign and worn booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed yesterday, the place where she'd worked for 3 years, where she'd served thousands of customers and made barely enough money to survive, the place where today she'd made a choice that might change everything. She started the car, the check engine light glowing faithfully, and drove home through the November darkness, unaware that in a car parked at the edge of the parking lot, 2 of Vincent Russo's men were watching, taking note of her license plate and the direction she drove. Unaware that in an office downtown, Russo himself was sitting behind a massive desk, thinking about a waitress named Emily Carter, who'd done something he'd believed impossible, passed his test with flying colors, proving that honesty still existed in a world he'd thought had forgotten it. Unaware that her choice, made in a moment of moral clarity in a diner's cluttered office, had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple outward in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The briefcase sat on Russo's desk, and inside it, the money remained untouched, exactly as Emily had left it, every single dollar accounted for. Emily's apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better days sometime around 1975. The hallway smelled of old cooking oil and mildew, and the fluorescent light on the 3rd-floor landing had been flickering for 2 weeks. She climbed the stairs slowly, her feet aching from the double shift, the envelope in her purse feeling heavier with each step. Inside, the apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. A studio barely large enough for a person to breathe in. The Murphy bed was still folded down from the night before, unmade and taking up most of the floor space. A tiny kitchenette occupied one corner, and a bathroom the size of a closet completed the layout. Rent was $850 a month, and even that was more than she could comfortably afford. Emily dropped her purse on the counter and pulled out the envelope. $5,000. She counted it 3 times, as if the bills might disappear or multiply if she looked away. But the number stayed the same. 50 crisp $100 bills that represented more money than she'd held in her hands in her entire life. She spread them out on the counter, organizing them into neat stacks, and pulled out the shoebox where she kept her bills. The hospital statement came first, $8,147.89. With this money, she could pay off more than half of it. The rent notice was next. She was already 2 weeks late, and her landlord had made it clear he was losing patience. That was another $850. The check engine light would probably cost $400 to fix, maybe more. Emily did the math in her head. After those essential expenses, she'd have maybe $2,700 left. She could buy groceries, real groceries instead of ramen and canned soup. She could get her winter coat out of the cleaners where she'd left it because she couldn't afford the $30 pickup fee. She could breathe for just a little while without the constant crushing weight of poverty on her chest. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "You get home safe?" "Yeah, I'm fine," Emily replied. "Good. Sleep well. We'll talk tomorrow." But sleep wouldn't come easily. Emily lay in bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying the day's events. Vincent Russo's face kept appearing in her mind. Those dark, assessing eyes that had looked at her like she was something rare and valuable. The way he'd said integrity was exceedingly rare, as if he'd spent a lifetime looking for it and finding only disappointment. What kind of man tested people like that? What kind of world did he live in, where trust was so absent that he had to stage elaborate scenarios just to see if anyone would be honest? And what did it mean that she'd passed his test? Maria's words echoed in her memory. Men like that, they remember favors and debts. You did something for him today, and he's going to feel like he owes you. But that means you'll owe him too someday. Emily rolled over, punching her flat pillow into a more comfortable shape. She'd done the right thing. She had to believe that. The money in the briefcase hadn't been hers, and keeping it would have made her a thief, no matter how desperately she needed it. Taking the reward was different. That was offered freely, earned through her honesty. But still, sleep didn't come. Every sound in the building made her jump. Footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere above, the ancient radiator clanking to life. She kept thinking about Russo's men, the way they'd positioned themselves by the door, the professional wariness in their movements. She thought about the security camera and whether it had been recording. She thought about the business card with its deliberately vague description, import, export. She thought about all the things people whispered about Vincent Russo, the rumors, the allegations, the careful distance even the police seemed to maintain. Around 2 a.m., Emily finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, and her dreams were filled with briefcases and dark eyes and choices that seemed simple until you looked at them closely. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, with rain drumming against the window. Emily woke feeling like she hadn't slept at all. The money was still on the counter where she'd left it, real and solid and impossible to ignore. She made coffee with the last of her cheap instant grounds and sat on the edge of her bed, looking at the bills. This was her chance, maybe her only chance, to get ahead, to stop drowning and actually catch her breath. She couldn't waste it. Emily spent the morning methodically paying bills online. The hospital payment went through first. $3,000 knocked off her debt, bringing it down to a number that seemed almost manageable. The rent payment next, with an apologetic email to her landlord. By noon, she'd allocated $4,100, leaving $900 for the car repair and whatever else came up. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. For the first time in months, she wasn't robbing Peter to pay Paul, wasn't juggling which bill to pay late and which to let slide. She was caught up, solvent, okay. Her phone rang. Pete's number. "Hey," she answered. "Just checking on you, kiddo. You doing all right after yesterday?" "I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. The money he gave me, Pete, I can pay my bills, all of them." There was a pause on the other end. "That's good, Em. Real good. You deserve some relief." Another pause. "You worried at all? About what comes next?" "What do you mean?" "Just, men like that don't usually do things without a reason." He gave you that money for passing his test, yeah, but he also gave you his card. Told you to call if you needed anything. So? So that's an open door, Em. And you gotta decide if you're gonna walk through it or not. Because once you do, once you take him up on that offer, you're in his world. Even just a little bit. Emily hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on the immediate relief of the money that she hadn't considered the implications of having Vincent Russo's direct number, of being someone he'd personally told to call if she needed anything. I don't plan on calling, she said. Good. That's real good. Pete sounded relieved. You're a smart girl, Emily. Smarter than your old man ever gave you credit for. You keep being smart, okay? After they hung up, Emily looked at the business card, still tucked in her wallet. Simple, elegant, with just a name and number. An open door, Pete had called it. She should throw it away. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of Russo's eyes, the respect she'd seen there when he realized she'd returned the money. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in her life, someone powerful had looked at her and seen value, not as a waitress or a body or a convenient target, but as a person whose integrity mattered. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just that doors didn't open very often for people like her, and throwing away even the possibility of one seemed wasteful. Emily slipped the card back into her wallet and tried not to think about what that decision meant. Monday morning, Emily returned to work feeling like a different person. The weight that had been pressing down on her for months had lifted, and she could almost forget about the briefcase, about Vincent Russo, about tests and choices and consequences. Almost. The day shift started normally enough. The regulars came in. She served coffee and eggs and made small talk about the weather. But around 10 a.m., a man she didn't recognize came in and took a seat at the counter. He was in his 30s, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, with short dark hair and a face that looked like it had been in a few fights. He ordered coffee and a Danish, and while Emily served him, she felt his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You're Emily, right?" he said, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "Yes," she said carefully. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're the girl who found Russo's briefcase." Emily's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Word gets around. You did the right thing, returning all that money." He took a sip of his coffee. "I'm just curious. Did you even think about keeping it?" "I need to get back to work," Emily said, turning away. His hand shot out, not grabbing her but stopping her with a gesture. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just saying that was a lot of money to give back." Russo must have been impressed. "I don't want any trouble," Emily said firmly. The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "No trouble. Like I said, just curious. You have a good day, Emily." He left a $10 bill for a $6 check and walked out. Emily watched him go, her heart pounding. She immediately went to the office and called Pete, her hands shaking as she described what had happened. "That's not good," Pete said grimly. "That's really not good, Em. If word's gotten out about the briefcase, about you being connected to Russo, you might have a target on your back." "A target?" "Pete, I just returned something that wasn't mine. I know that, and you know that. But other people? They might see it different. They might think Russo's protecting you, or that you know something, or that you're somehow valuable to him. And in that world, being valuable to one person makes you a liability to everyone else." Emily sank into the office chair, feeling sick. "What do I do?" "I don't know, kiddo, but maybe..." Pete hesitated. "Maybe you should use that number he gave you. Tell him what happened. If people are bothering you because of him, he should know. I can't call Vincent Russo every time some stranger talks to me. Maybe not. But if that guy comes back, or if anyone else starts asking questions, you call. You hear me? This is exactly the kind of situation where having Russo's number might save your life." After hanging up, Emily sat in the office for a long moment, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd thought returning the briefcase was the end of the story, a single choice made and done. But Pete was right. She'd stepped into something bigger than she'd understood, and the ripples were still spreading outward. The rest of her shift passed in a haze of anxiety. Every time the door opened, she tensed. Every unfamiliar face made her wonder if they knew, if they'd heard, if they were there because of her connection to Vincent Russo. By the time she left work that evening, Emily was exhausted and paranoid. She drove home with one eye on her rearview mirror, convinced she was being followed even though she saw no evidence of it. In her apartment, she pulled out Russo's card again and stared at the number. Pete was right. This was an open door. But now she understood that it was also a trap. By returning the briefcase, by taking the reward, by accepting Russo's offer of future help, she'd become tangled in his world whether she wanted to be or not. The question wasn't whether she'd walk through that door Pete had warned her about. The question was whether she'd already walked through it without realizing, and was only now discovering she couldn't find her way back. Emily set the card on her counter and made herself dinner, real food bought with Russo's money, and tried to convince herself that everything would be fine. But in a parking lot across from her building, a car sat with its lights off, and inside, someone was watching her window, taking notes and making phone calls that would set into motion events Emily couldn't begin to imagine. The test was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The week following the stranger's visit passed with agonizing slowness. Emily moved through her shifts at Ruby's Diner, in a state of heightened awareness, scrutinizing every customer, every car that lingered too long in the parking lot, every unfamiliar face. The paranoia was exhausting, turning her mind into a constant loop of worst-case scenarios and imagined threats. Tuesday brought rain that lasted all day, the kind of cold November downpour that made the diner feel like a refuge. Emily was refilling the coffee station when Maria pulled her aside during the mid-morning lull. "You look terrible," Maria said bluntly. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been jumpy all week. What happened?" Emily glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then told Maria about the man who'd come in asking questions. Maria's expression darkened with each word. "That's bad, mija. That's really bad. These people, they don't just ask friendly questions. If they're sniffing around you, it means something." "I know. Pete said I should call Russo if it happens again." "Pete's right. Look, I know you want to stay out of all this, but you're already in it. That man marked you the second he left that briefcase. You might as well use the protection he offered. What if calling him makes things worse? What if it makes me more involved?" Maria's laugh was bitter. "Honey, you can't get more involved than you already are. At least if you call, he'll know you're in trouble. And trust me, you want Vincent Russo on your side. Not wondering why you didn't tell him his name is being thrown around by strangers harassing his... What are you anyway? His friend? His project? I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress who returned his briefcase. To him, you're the person who proved something he thought didn't exist anymore. That makes you important. And in his world, important people get protected, or they get eliminated. There's no in-between." The word sent a chill down Emily's spine, but before she could respond, the door chimed, and a group of construction workers came in for their lunch break. The conversation ended, but Maria's warning stayed with Emily for the rest of the day. Wednesday morning started like any other. Emily arrived at 5:45 a.m. to find Pete already at the grill, the familiar smell of bacon and coffee greeting her like an old friend. The pre-dawn darkness outside felt protective somehow, as if the dangers of the past week couldn't reach her in these quiet hours before the world woke up. She was wrong. At 6:30 a.m., as the first hints of gray light appeared on the horizon, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Emily's heart jumped. It was the same vehicle Vincent Russo had left in the previous week. She watched through the window as two men got out, but neither was Russo himself. She recognized them as the associates who'd been with him, the broad-shouldered one and the one with the beard. They came inside, and the bearded man approached the counter with a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning. Emily Carter?" "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "My name is David Chen. This is Marcus Cole." He gestured to his companion. "We work for Mr. Russo. He'd like to speak with you if you have a moment." Emily's mind raced. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all. Mr. Russo simply has a proposition for you. It won't take long, maybe 15-20 minutes. We can wait while you finish your current customers." Emily looked at Pete, who had appeared in the kitchen window, his face creased with concern. She gave him a small nod. "It's okay," though she wasn't sure it was. "Let me just clean up a few things," she said. 10 minutes later, Emily was sitting in the back seat of the SUV, Marcus driving while David sat up front. Neither man spoke, and Emily didn't try to force conversation. The vehicle's interior was immaculate, leather seats and tinted windows that made the morning light seem distant and unreal. They drove for about 20 minutes, leaving the highway and entering a part of the city Emily rarely visited, the business district where glass towers reflected the cloudy sky and people in expensive suits hurried along sidewalks with purpose. The SUV pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building that looked like it cost more than Emily would make in 10 lifetimes. "This way, please," David said politely, leading her to a private elevator. The ride up was silent except for the subtle hum of machinery. Emily watched the numbers climb, 10, 15, 20, 25, until finally stopping at 28. The doors opened onto a reception area that screamed money and power. Marble floors, modern art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. A woman behind a sleek desk looked up and smiled. "Mr. Russo is expecting you. Go right in." David opened a set of heavy wooden doors, revealing an office that was somehow both intimidating and comfortable. Dark wood paneling, built-in bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive desk that looked hand-carved. And behind that desk, rising to greet her, was Vincent Russo. He looked different in this setting, still commanding but somehow more human. He wore a burgundy sweater over a white shirt, no tie, reading glasses perched on his nose. Papers were spread across his desk and a laptop sat open beside them. "Miss Carter, thank you for coming." He gestured to a pair of leather chairs arranged in front of the windows. "Please, sit. Would you like coffee? Tea?" "I'm fine, thank you." Emily sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Russo settled into the chair opposite her, and for a moment he simply looked at her, that same assessing gaze from their first meeting. Finally, he spoke. "I understand you had an interesting visitor earlier this week. A man asking questions about the briefcase." Emily's stomach dropped. "How did you know about that?" "I make it my business to know things, Miss Carter, especially things that concern people I've taken an interest in." "Can you describe this man?" Emily did, recalling every detail she could remember. Russo listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. "That would be Tommy Breslin," he said when she finished. "He works for a competitor of mine, a man named Ray Castellano. They've been testing boundaries lately, seeing where they can push." His eyes hardened. "Using you to do it crosses a line. Mr. Russo, I don't want any trouble. I just returned your briefcase, that's all." "I know, and that's precisely why this concerns me." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Carter, Emily, may I be frank with you? Please. In my line of work, trust is a rare and valuable commodity. Most people can be bought, intimidated, or manipulated, but you did something remarkable. You had the opportunity to take a substantial amount of money you desperately needed, and you chose not to. Do you understand how unusual that is? I just did what anyone should do, but they don't, that's my point. In 30 years, I've tested dozens of people in similar ways. Every single one either kept the money or tried to negotiate a reward before returning it. You're the first person who simply gave it back and expected nothing." Emily didn't know what to say to that. Russo continued, "That kind of integrity makes you valuable to me. It also, unfortunately, makes you a target for people who want to hurt me. Castellano knows that I respect you, and he'll try to use that against me, either by threatening you, bribing you, or worse. What does he want? Information, access, a way to get to me, and right now you represent a potential vulnerability." Russo's expression softened slightly. "I don't say this to frighten you, but you need to understand the situation. By returning that briefcase, you've entered a world that doesn't forget gestures like that. You're on my radar now, which means you're on everyone's radar." Emily felt her earlier fear crystallizing into something harder. Anger. "So I'm being punished for doing the right thing?" "Not punished. Protected." Russo stood and walked to his desk, returning with a folder. "I have a proposition for you. I own several legitimate businesses, restaurants, import companies, a few retail establishments. One of them is a restaurant in the city, Russo's Table. It's been doing well, but my current manager is retiring. I'd like to offer you the position." Emily stared at him. "You want me to manage a restaurant?" "Mr. Russo, I'm a waitress at a roadside diner. I don't have any management experience. I don't have a degree. You have something more valuable than any degree: integrity, common sense, and an understanding of what good service looks like. The rest can be taught." He handed her the folder. "The salary is $65,000 a year plus benefits and a performance bonus. The restaurant operates Wednesday through Sunday, dinner service only. You'd have Mondays and Tuesdays off." Emily opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were details about the restaurant, photos of an elegant dining room with white tablecloths and soft lighting, a menu featuring Italian-American cuisine, employee information. The salary figure jumped out at her. $65,000. More than 3 times what she made at Ruby's. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why would you do this?" "Several reasons. First, you'd be excellent at the job, I can see that. Second, working for me directly puts you under my protection in a way that's clear to everyone in this city. Castellano and anyone else who might think about using you as leverage will know that touching you means declaring war on me. And third, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I'd like to believe that there's still a place in this world for people like you, people who do the right thing. Giving you an opportunity to thrive seems like a good investment in that belief. Emily looked down at the folder, her mind spinning. $65,000 a year, health insurance, days off, a real job with a real future, not just treading water at a diner that barely paid enough to survive. But it came from Vincent Russo, a man whose business card said import-export, but whose real business was something darker, something that operated in the shadows where the law didn't quite reach. Taking this job would mean becoming part of his world, accepting his protection, owing him in ways she couldn't fully calculate. Is the restaurant legitimate? She asked. No money laundering, no criminal activity. Russo's smile was genuine this time, completely legitimate. Russo's table has been in operation for 8 years, fully licensed, regularly inspected and profitable without any illegal assistance. I have several businesses like that, holdovers from my father's generation, when he still believed in having legitimate fronts. I've kept them running because they're actually good investments and because, he shrugged, everyone needs to eat dinner somewhere. And you'd really trust me to run it? I'd trust you to try. You'd have Antonio, the current manager, helping you transition for the first month. After that, you'd be on your own, but you could call me any time if you needed guidance. I'm a very hands-off owner as long as the business runs well. Emily looked out the window at the city spread below, thinking about her studio apartment with its flickering lights and water stains, thinking about the diner where she'd worked for 3 years, serving eggs and coffee to people who barely saw her as human, thinking about the hospital debt that still weighed on her despite the payment she'd made, thinking about her father and the choices he'd made, the slow slide into addiction and death, and the legacy he'd left her. Nothing but debt and a lesson about what happened when you gave up on yourself. This was a chance to build something different, a real career, financial stability, a future that didn't involve calculating which bills to pay late each month. It was everything she'd wanted but never thought she could have, but it came with strings attached. It came from a world she'd only glimpsed through windows, a world where men like Vincent Russo operated by different rules, and where honesty was so rare it seemed like a miracle. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, take a few days. But Emily, Russo's voice became more serious. Understand that staying at the diner doesn't make you safer. Castellano's people know where you work, where you live. If anything, working for me gives you protection. The restaurant has security. The staff knows to look out for trouble. And anyone thinking about causing problems will think twice. Is my life really in danger? I don't think Castellano would be stupid enough to actually harm you. That would start a war he can't win. But intimidation, harassment, making your life difficult, those are all possibilities. He wants to test my boundaries, and you're the easiest way to do that. Emily closed the folder and stood. I'll think about it. Can I call you in a few days? Absolutely. Russo pulled out one of his business cards and wrote something on the back. That's my personal cell. Call anytime. David Chen drove her back to the diner, the trip passing in silence. Emily's mind was too full for conversation, weighing possibilities and consequences, trying to see the path forward that didn't end in disaster. Pete was waiting when she returned, his face creased with worry. Everything okay? He offered me a job, managing one of his restaurants. $65,000 a year. Pete's eyes widened. Jesus, that's a lot of money, Em. I know. You gonna take it? I don't know. What would you do? Pete was quiet for a long moment, wiping down the counter in slow, methodical circles. Finally, he said, I'd probably take it, because the alternative, staying here, making nothing, being vulnerable, that doesn't seem better. At least if you work for him, you've got protection. You've got a future. But I'd be working for Vincent Russo. You'd be working for a restaurant, a legitimate one, from what he said. And yeah, the owner has other interests. But almost every major business in this city has connections like that somewhere up the chain. The difference is, Russo's honest about it. He's not pretending to be something he's not. Emily wanted to argue, to find a reason why Pete was wrong, but she couldn't. Everything he said made a terrible kind of sense. That night, Emily lay awake again, but this time it wasn't fear keeping her up. It was possibility. She imagined herself in the restaurant from the photos, greeting customers, managing staff, making real money doing something she was good at. She imagined an apartment with working lights and no water stains, a car without a check engine light, a life without the constant crushing anxiety of poverty. She imagined her father, wherever he was, watching her make this choice. Would he approve? Would he understand? Or would he see it as a compromise, a deal with the devil that would corrupt her the way alcohol had corrupted him? But maybe that was the wrong question. Maybe the right question was, what would the best version of her father, the one from Saturday morning pancakes and bike riding lessons, want for her? And that answer was easy. He'd want her to have a chance. He'd want her to build something better than what he'd left behind. Around 3 a.m., Emily made her decision. Thursday morning, she called the number Russo had written on the back of his card. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Carter, I'll take the job," she said without preamble. "But I have conditions." "I'm listening." "The restaurant stays completely legitimate. No criminal activity, no money laundering, nothing illegal. If I ever find out otherwise, I quit immediately. No notice, no explanation. And second, I want a written contract stating that I'm an employee of the restaurant, not personally employed by you. If anyone asks, I work for Russo's table, not Vincent Russo. I need that separation." There was a pause. Then Russo's voice came back with what sounded like genuine respect. "Agreed on both counts. I'll have my lawyer draw up a contract. Can you start Monday? I need to give Ruby's 2 weeks' notice." "Of course. 2 weeks from Monday, then. Welcome aboard, Miss Carter." After hanging up, Emily sat on her bed and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She'd done it. She'd walked through the door, made the choice, accepted the opportunity. For better or worse, her life was about to change completely. She called Pete and told him, then Maria. Both congratulated her, though she could hear the worry underlying their words. She gave her notice to Ruby, the actual owner, reached by phone in Florida, who was gracious and understanding. The 2 weeks passed in a strange blur. Emily worked her shifts at the diner with a new awareness that each one was bringing her closer to the end of this chapter of her life. Regular customers asked what was next, and she told them she'd gotten a management position at a restaurant in the city, leaving out the name and the owner. On her last day, Pete made her pancakes in the shape of Mickey Mouse, the way her father used to. Emily cried a little, hugged everyone, and walked out of Ruby's diner for the last time as an employee. Monday morning, she put on her best outfit, a simple black dress and flats, professional if not expensive, and drove to Russo's table. The restaurant was in a trendy neighborhood, sandwiched between a boutique and an art gallery. The exterior was elegant without being ostentatious, the windows etched with the restaurant's name in flowing script. Antonio, the retiring manager, was waiting inside. He was in his 60s with white hair and kind eyes, and he spent the entire day walking Emily through every aspect of the operation. The kitchen staff, the servers, the ordering system, the reservation book, the wine list. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. That first week was the hardest of Emily's life. She worked 12-hour days, learning everything she could, making mistakes and fixing them, slowly earning the respect of a staff that had been skeptical of the new manager who'd appeared out of nowhere. But she worked harder than anyone, stayed later, came in earlier, and gradually the restaurant began to feel like hers. Vincent Russo came by once during her second week, sat quietly at the bar with a glass of wine and watched her work. When he left, he caught her eye and gave her a small nod of approval that made her feel ridiculously proud. By the end of her first month, Emily had moved into a new apartment. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe, with working lights and no water stains. She'd paid off the remaining hospital debt. She'd gotten her car fixed. She'd bought real groceries and cooked actual meals. She'd started sleeping through the night, but she'd also started noticing things. The way certain customers were treated with extra deference by the staff, the private rooms upstairs that were never listed in the reservation book, the men in expensive suits who came in through the back entrance and left the same way, the careful way Antonio had taught her which questions to ask and which to politely ignore. Russo's table was legitimate, just as Russo had promised, but it existed in orbit around his other interests, a bright star in a dark solar system, and Emily was learning to navigate by the light it cast without looking too closely at the shadows. She told herself it was fine. She was just managing a restaurant. What the owner did outside these walls wasn't her concern or her responsibility. She'd set her boundaries, and Russo had respected them. But late at night, in her new apartment, Emily sometimes wondered if Maria had been right, if there really was no in-between in Russo's world, no way to take the good without eventually confronting the bad. And she wondered what would happen when that confrontation came, because in her bones, She knew it would. Doors that opened didn't close easily. Tests that were passed led to new tests, and debts of gratitude, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually came due. For now, though, Emily chose to focus on the present. Her staff, her customers, her work. She was good at this job, and she was building something real. Whatever came next, she'd face it when it arrived. She just hoped she'd be strong enough to face it standing up. 3 months into her new life, Emily's world shattered on a cold February evening. She was closing the restaurant when 2 men cornered her in the parking lot. Not Russo's people. These were rougher, dangerous in a way that made her blood freeze. "Ray Castellano wants to talk," the taller one said, blocking her path to her car. "I don't know who that is," Emily lied. "Sure you do. Russo's competition. He's got a proposition. You help us get some information about Russo's operations. We make it worth your while. Real worth your while." Emily's heart hammered. "I manage a restaurant. I don't know anything about his operations." The second man stepped closer, his voice dropping to something uglier. "We know where you live, Emily. We know you're alone. No family, no boyfriend. Nobody would miss you for days if something happened." Terror flooded through her, but before she could scream, headlights swept across the parking lot. 2 vehicles, moving fast. Russo's men. Marcus and David emerged, and the confrontation shifted instantly. Castellano's men backed off, hands raised, but the damage was done. Emily stood shaking, barely able to breathe. Then Vincent Russo himself arrived, his face carved from stone and fury. "Get her inside," he ordered. "Nobody touches her, ever." The conference room above Russo's table felt like a fortress. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights glittering below, but heavy curtains could transform it into a sealed bunker in seconds. Emily sat with a blanket around her shoulders, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she couldn't drink, while Marcus stood guard at the door. Vincent Russo paced like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and deadly as he issued instructions to people Emily couldn't see. When he finally hung up, he turned to her with an expression that was equal parts concern and barely controlled rage. "Are you hurt?" His voice was surprisingly gentle. "No, they threatened me," said Castellano. Wanted information. Emily's voice shook despite her efforts to steady it. Russo's jaw tightened. "This ends tonight." Castellano crossed a line he can't uncross. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Emily, I need you to understand something. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. You returned a briefcase and did the right thing, and I brought you into my world. That's on me, not you. What happens now? Now I make it clear that you're untouchable, completely and permanently off limits. Castellano will get the message. Trust me on that." He paused. "But I also need to know what you want. Do you want out? I can arrange protection, relocate you if necessary, set you up somewhere far from all of this. You'd be safe, and you'd never have to see me or this world again." Emily looked at him. This complicated man who'd tested her honesty and changed her life, who operated in shadows but had shown her nothing but respect. She thought about the past 3 months, the restaurant, her staff, the pride she felt in building something real. She thought about running away, starting over somewhere new with nothing but fear as her companion. "I don't want to run," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life running from problems, from debt, from my father's mistakes. I'm tired of running." Something flickered in Russo's eyes. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "Then you stay. But we do this my way. You get a security detail, at least for the next few months. You move to a building I own, one with actual security, and you let me handle Castellano. What are you going to do to him? Nothing that concerns you. That's the boundary, Emily. You manage my restaurant, you live your life, and you let me handle the ugliness. That's the deal." Over the next 2 weeks, Emily's life transformed again. She moved into a modern apartment building with a doorman, security cameras, and Marcus or David always nearby but never intrusive. The restaurant operated smoothly, her staff none the wiser about the drama playing out in the shadows. She heard through whispers that Ray Castellano had left the city abruptly, his operations dismantled, his people scattered. She didn't ask for details. She didn't want to know. Spring arrived, and with it, a sense of normalcy Emily hadn't felt in years. The security detail gradually became less obvious, though she knew they were still there. She excelled at her job, increasing the restaurant's profits by 15% in her first quarter. Russo sent her a handwritten note of congratulation and a bonus that made her cry. One evening in late April, a young waiter named Jake approached her nervously in the office. "Miss Carter? I found this under table 7. I think a customer left it." He held out an expensive watch, platinum with diamonds around the face. Emily looked at it, then at Jake's uncertain expression. She saw herself 6 months ago, holding a briefcase facing an impossible choice. She saw the test for what it was. Not Russo's this time, but life's. The universe asking what kind of person she'd become, whether success had changed her core values. "Good eye, Jake. Let's check the reservation book, find out who sat there, and call them." She smiled at his relief. "We always do the right thing here. Always. That's not negotiable." After Jake left, Emily stood at the window looking out at the city. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. A forgotten briefcase, an impossible choice, and the chain of consequences that followed. She thought about Vincent Russo, still a mystery in many ways, but also a man who'd kept his word, respected her boundaries, and given her a chance when no one else would. Her phone buzzed. A text from Russo. "Heard about the watch. Proud of you." Emily smiled. Somehow he always knew. Maybe that should have bothered her, but instead it felt like validation. She'd passed another test, but this time, it hadn't been about impressing anyone else. It had been about staying true to herself. The restaurant hummed with life below her. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses and silverware. Her restaurant now in all the ways that mattered, built on a foundation of integrity, even if that foundation had been laid in a morally complicated world. Emily had learned that life wasn't about finding perfect choices. It was about making honest ones and living with the consequences. She'd found her briefcase full of money and given it back. She'd been offered a door into a different world and walked through it. She'd faced danger and chosen not to run. And now she stood in a place she'd built through hard work and determination, surrounded by people who respected her, protected by someone who valued what she represented. The young waitress from Ruby's diner was gone. In her place stood Emily Carter, restaurant manager, survivor, and living proof that integrity could thrive even in unexpected places. She'd never forget where she came from, but she was no longer defined by it. The briefcase had been a test. Everything since had been a choice, and Emily had chosen to become someone she could be proud of. That, she thought, watching the city lights shimmer, was worth more than any amount of money in any briefcase. It was worth everything.